Yeah, welcome along to the transfer show. And speaking of number one targets, when we're talking transfers, the only two men that we want to speak to, Dharmesh Sheth and Mark McAdam. Great to see you guys. For the next hour, we're going to be discussing the moves that are on, the moves that are off, and those that could still develop. Marcus Rashford is heavily criticised by a former Manchester United and England forward. We'll assess what's next for the five players hoping to exit Old Trafford this summer. Let's take a short break, and after the break, Manchester United's second bid for Bryan Mbeumo was rejected at the end of June. When we come back, we'll let you know how things stand. Now to some brutal criticism of Marcus Rashford from Teddy Sheringham, who has claimed the Manchester United forward does not deserve a move to Barcelona. Sheringham, who of course won the treble with United, claims the whole situation surrounding Rashford's potential departure is soul-destroying, and he's questioned the player's professionalism. Well, Rashford has returned to United's training base at Carrington this week, despite being offered extra time off following his loan spell at Aston Villa. The England forward is one of 5 United players who have said they want to leave. Last week, we reported Rashford was Barcelona's #1 left-wing target. Well, here's what Sheringham has actually had to say. If you assess where Marcus Rashford is at as a professional footballer, you strive as a youngster to get to the very top and play for clubs like Manchester United. And when you're there, you appreciate it. You don't throw it away and say you want to leave. I find the whole episode very soul-destroying compared to the way I was back in the day and how I strove to get the privilege to play for such a huge football club. To hear someone talking the way he is talking, saying he wants out, I didn't like Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang doing that at Arsenal. I thought it was soul-destroying, and I hope Rashford doesn't get the move that he's hankering for. From my perspective, if you go from Manchester United to Barcelona, that's a step up that he hasn't deserved. Yeah, Mark, really strong words there. What did you make of what Sheringham had to say?
Well, Teddy Sheringham's one of those iconic Premier League players and was a part of a hugely successful era, not only at Tottenham, but of course Manchester United, and played, well into his 40s. I remember watching him play for Colchester in his 40s. So when a player of his calibre, his knowledge, experience, sits up and says things, you take notice. He's been there, done it and got the T-shirt. No question about his words being very, very powerful. And if that's how he views the situation, then he, as a former Manchester United player, absolutely has the right. When we look at the current situation, we know that Barcelona are interested in Marcus Rashford and he is their #1 target at this stage for that left-wing berth that they're looking to recruit for. There's been still no formal offer from Barcelona to Manchester United. However, they do remain interested. I think the most positive and powerful thing that Barcelona have on their side is that they know that Marcus Rashford is desperate to play for them at Barcelona, and he's made no secret about his desire to head over to Spain. The problem will be finance, and that's where Manchester United...
His salary?
His salary. And Manchester United will be looking at a player through their academy and saying, well, actually, he represents 100% profit, so we want our £40 million, which was what was agreed with Aston Villa, but they decided not to exercise that option. So therefore, we need to get that kind of money because that's what we believe he's worth as a minimum.
Just aside of Rashford, there are a few other players
trying to get
that we do know that Manchester United have said, look, just delay your return to training, sort out your futures. One of those, of course, is Jadon Sancho. Interesting what's happening there at the moment because Juventus are very interested in Jadon Sancho. However, they're currently finalising a deal to sign the Porto forward, Francisco Conceição, who they had on a straight loan last season. And at the end of that, there was no option, but there was a release clause in his contract. Juventus were trying to negotiate on that release clause. Porto wanted 30 million euros up front. Juventus wanted to pay a little bit more, in return for more favourable payment terms, which is what we think they've agreed to do. They're going to pay Porto 32 million euros and they'll pay that over 4 instalments. Now, the feeling was it was going to be one or the other, Conceição or Sancho, but the information that we're getting is that a deal for Sancho to Juventus has not been ruled out, but it is thought there would have to be departures at Juventus for them to be able to fund a deal for Sancho. Now, significantly, Marseille are in talks with Juventus over a potential deal for Timothy Weah. Now, that could help Juventus fund a deal for Jadon Sancho. Talks between United and Juve are open, as are talks between Juve and Sancho's representatives. As yet, there's not been an agreement on either. So there hasn't been an agreement on a transfer fee. And we talked about Rashford's wages. Sancho's on big wages as well. So Juventus remain in talks with his representatives over trying to find an agreement on the personal terms. It feels like the more problematic one would be the personal terms. And then Juventus could probably negotiate on the transfer fee with regard to Jadon Sancho. So no agreement on either front yet, but we think that Sancho's asking price is around £25 million, which is what Chelsea would have had to have paid had they taken up their obligation at the end of last season. Antony, meanwhile, Real Betis, we know they remain desperate to sign Antony. Antony wants to go to Real Betis, had a really successful second half of last season at Real Betis. Difficult deal again for Real Betis to do, given the finances involved. But these 5 players behind me, they're the ones that Manchester United want to do permanent deals for.
Alejandro Garnacho as well. Any updates on him? He carries on posting these cryptic social media posts.
Yeah, I mean, Manchester United, again, want to do deals for all 5. There haven't been any formal offers, we think, at the moment. Napoli were interested earlier on in this transfer window, but they couldn't get a deal done. The noises around Garnacho would suggest that any deal, he would prefer a permanent deal to a Premier League club, so he wants to stay in England.
OK, so Manchester United trying to offload some players, but in terms of bringing a player in, Bryan Mbeumo still has not walked through that door, and we know that Manchester United are very interested. What's the latest?
People keep saying, don't they, what's going on?
I feel like I've asked this question more than any other this transfer window.
It's becoming a little bit of a transfer summer saga, isn't it? We know that Manchester United are interested. Their second offer was rejected. They remain confident that they can get a deal over the line for Bryan Mbeumo. We're expecting to see a third bid, which would probably be a final bid for the Brentford man. Manchester United would love to get this wrapped up and sorted before they go on their pre-season tour of the USA as well, and they very much want Bryan Mbeumo to be a part of that squad that travels with Ruben Amorim. The key thing is the fee and, most importantly, the structure of the payments. Brentford have always been quite staunch in that we want £65 million and we want the majority of that paid up front. So therefore, Manchester United are either going to have to be a little bit creative or they're going to have to find a softened stance from Brentford to get this deal over the line. I feel like I'm a broken record. I keep saying it feels like it's close. It feels like it's close.
Okay.
But until it feels Manchester United lodged that third bid, we're still just waiting for those moments.
Just off the back of that, I think Brentford will wisely look at Mbeumo if he was to leave. They've got to prepare themselves that if the deal to Manchester United does materialise eventually, they're going to need to be in a position to start the season having replaced Bryan Mbeumo.
We spoke about Manchester United before and the fact they're trying to offload those 5 players, but we know that they're trying to offload those 5 players. All of their rivals know that.
Yeah.
Does that mean that those rivals can then offer under the cush for these 5? I mean, how does United get rid of these players?
Well, look, I touched on this a bit earlier on, but Manchester United's preference for all of these 5 players is to do permanent sales for them. Right. However, that is easier said than done. If they were to do permanent sales for all of them, you're looking at 125 to 150 million pounds that they could glean to rebuild again in this transfer window. However, the interested clubs for most of these players are also discussing not only a permanent deal, but also a loan deal as well. Now, as far as United are concerned, if it is to be loans for any of these players, they would want a permanent element attached to that. So maybe an obligation at the end of that deal. They would also want to be quite creative with their loans. And they have done this kind of thing before. If you look back to the example of Jadon Sancho, he had 2 loan spells when he's been at Manchester United. One with Borussia Dortmund and one with Chelsea. Now, the one with Borussia Dortmund, Manchester United actually made a profit on his wages in that time. People ask, how did Manchester United do that? Well, it was an incentivised wage percentage that they did. So basically, when they let him go to Borussia Dortmund, they said, we're going to pay a percentage of these wages. But depending on how well he does and how well Borussia Dortmund do, the percentage that Manchester United pay will go down, the percentage that Borussia Dortmund pay will go up. And it went up in an increasing scale, to the point that Borussia Dortmund made the Champions League final in 2024. And because they did that, the wages that they actually paid Manchester United for Jadon Sancho exceeded 100%. Hence why Manchester United actually made a profit on those wages. They did something quite different with Chelsea. They attached a permanent obligation at the end of that loan spell. But they also said, right, Chelsea, you've got to pay £25 million at the end of the season. If you don't do the obligation, then there is going to be a penalty of £5 million that you are going to have to pay us for not taking up that obligation. Chelsea ended up not taking up that obligation and then had to pay Manchester United that £5 million. So I think whatever Manchester United do with these 5 players, number one priority would be permanent, but loans cannot be ruled out, but they will be creative with them like they did with Sancho in the past 2 spells that he had away from the club.